their careers ties them with Mike Lopez Alegria and Peggy Whitson is the most for U.S. astronauts. So they were extremely busy while they were on the space station. I know Chris Cassidy was happy to have some help on board, as it's just been him and his 2 Russian cosmonauts for the last several months, and they're kind of back in that situation now, and that's why we're really looking forward to Crew 1 coming up this fall.
Yeah, days on the International Space Station, in addition to spacewalks and performing science experiments, you also have to eat, you have to sleep, and you have to exercise. So it's really easy to see how whenever there are only a couple of people on the International Space Station, that things that are, exercise, eating, and sleeping are absolutely essential. Exercise helps to keep the body strong and try to prevent the effects of that microgravity has on the human body. So when it comes to what might get shifted out a little bit, it's not exercise, it's not eating, it's not sleeping, and so having 2 extra hands on board to assist with things like spacewalks and being able to perform some of the science on board was definitely a help. But in addition to that, Bob and Doug were also completing mission objectives related to Demo 2 while it was docked, making sure that the battery life was as expected, making sure that the solar panels were still absorbing and generating power as expected. So I am sure that by the time that they get home, they will be pretty tired, not just from the dynamic events happening today, but just from the last 2 months as a whole. I'm getting tired just thinking about it.
Ready for a break, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, our next question comes from Philip Hartman, who wants to know how much training does it take to be able to operate, control all of the technology on Dragon and the things on Space Station? I can touch on the space station stuff. We typically train crew members for about 2 years. We've had a couple that kind of cram in that training a little bit shorter than that, but typically crew members get assigned about 2 years out and spend that entire time training just to do day-to-day tasks on board the space station. I mean, that's everything from just operating the basic facilities, learning how to repair all of the major pieces of hardware, like the thing that generates your oxygen or scrubs the carbon dioxide, how the water recycling system works. They get kind of crash courses in operating a bunch of different science hardware that's on board the space station. You kind of have to become a jack of all trades when you're up there, because one day you're a mechanic, the next day you're a physicist, the next day you're spacewalking. And so they get a whole bunch of training that they have to take, and it's done all over the world too.
Yeah, definitely can't call a handyman when something goes wrong.
Yeah.
You are the handyman. The next question comes to us from Abby. Again, this is the hashtag AskNASA on Twitter. This may be a silly question, but is there a telescope on the ISS that the crew can use?
They don't have a telescope. They don't actually have very many windows that look up at the stars. We have a number of science experiments that are on the International Space Station that use its position outside of the Earth's atmosphere to look kind of beyond our solar system. We have some that aren't necessarily telescopes, but like the Alpha Magnetic Spectrometer, which is looking for signs of dark matter. And then we have one that was a Japanese payload. The name is escaping me, but it was essentially looking for pulsars throughout the universe. And was really cool. It was essentially developing a futuristic version of GPS, where it was looking to develop a system or a map where you could use pulsars, some of the brightest objects in the universe, to navigate. And obviously that's not something we need to worry about right now, because we're not leaving our solar system anytime soon. But we're already learning how to do that, and we're using the International Space Station to do it. They have some big lenses for their cameras, but those are pretty much pointed back down towards Earth. Our next question wanted to know, how does the communication to Dragon work? Is it done through satellites?
Partially, yes. If you think about the International Space Station orbiting Earth, it technically is considered a satellite as well as a spaceship.
Really big one.
Yeah. And then we also have ground stations across the world that are able to provide uplinks and downlinks from the station, as well as from Dragon capsule itself. So we try to make all of those connections as direct as possible to us here in Mission Control, for trying to reduce latency and making making sure that we get high quality feeds. So we try to avoid ping-ponging as much as possible. But yeah, there are a number of ways, but generally speaking, we go from capsule to ground in as short of a distance as possible.
All right, our next one comes from Juliet, who wants to know, does NASA have a full-size mock-up of the space station in a training facility? We have several, actually. We have a building called the Space Vehicle Mock-up Facility at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, where we have a full-size mock-up of every single habitable module. So that's essentially saying every single module you can actually go inside. There's a huge part of the space station itself that's just external, that isn't pressurized, and the astronauts only really see when they're spacewalking. So to familiarize them with that part, we have a full-size mock-up in the bottom of our swimming pool, the Neutral Buoyancy Laboratory, a 40-foot deep pool where they practice how to spacewalk. So we have several, and they're typically of kind of different fidelity is what we call them. So you'll have some that have real racks, real science hardware, real oxygen generation system built in, and then you'll have some that are just kind of representative of them. They'll be full-size, but they might have like a printed poster of what's on the wall here. But you can still use things like that for emergency training. We really try to do as much training on the ground, and I know we do the same in Dragon, in something that's lifelike for what they're about to be flying on once they're in space. So by the time that they get there, a lot of your actions just feel like reflex.
So at this point, we're going to check in on Dragon. Looks like it is about to go over Eastern Europe. We're going to show our ground track here and allow you to follow along. We still have, let me check my timer here. We still have 2 hours and 1 minute until our major milestone begins. That will be the claw separation in preparation to jettison the trunk. Again, that's coming up in 2 hours and 1 minute at 10:51 a.m. Pacific or 18:51 Universal. So stay with us and enjoy watching Dragon traverse the Earth.
SpaceX Dragon for inventory after fluid loading.
Okay, SpaceX is ready to copy fluid inventory after fluid loading.
Okay, from location 10, 2 additional bottles were consumed from bag 207 and 1 from bag 206. So that leaves 208 empty, 207 empty, and 206 with 2 remaining. From location 9, 3 bottles were consumed from 203. So that leaves 203 and 204 as empties. Everything else is per the packing plan.
Okay, thanks for the update. Looks like bag 207 consumed 2 bottles, 206 consumed 1 bottle, 208, 207 are empty, and 206 has 2 remaining. And then from location 9, we copy 2 bottles from 203, I believe, and that means 203 and 204 empty, the rest per packing plan.
From location 9, 203 and 204 are empty, and everything else is per the packing plan.
Okay, copy location 9, correction, 203 and 204 empty, the rest in location 9 per the packing plan.
Good, we're back.
And just one more sanity check, Bob. Could you just tell us the total number of bottles consumed?
Let me try to do the math from my notes here. I believe since departing station, we've consumed 13 bottles.
Okay, copy. 13 bottles. We'll reconcile our records down here and let you know if we got any questions. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Solo. And we're about to close out locations 9 and 10 and be suited, and so it's not going to be practical to go back and re-inventory anything if there's any questions after about 3 minutes. So please let us know if you can early.
Okay, copy. And actually, we do have a question for location 10, bag 206. Can you please read back the quantity there remaining?
Okay, let me unstow that bag. It looks like I made a mistake. I thought they had 3 bottles in each one, and I just reported 1 was removed. But I'll have to unstow the bag to count the quantity inside of 206.
We have a pretty good readout, Bob, that 206 started at 5 bottles. So if you know you took 2 out of there, we can call that one 3.
No, from 206, we took a single bottle out. So let me count them for you.
Okay, thanks for that double check.
And in location 206, there are 4 bottles remaining.
Okay, 4 bottles remaining in 206. That math makes better sense to us. Appreciate it.
All right, well, we are still just getting closer and closer to things really picking up as Bob and Doug get ready to hit the final phase of their flight back to Earth and the end of this Demo 2 mission. Still have a couple of milestones to go, but I mean, everything picked up when we departed the space station yesterday, and it's been a pretty smooth ride so far. So everything really kicked off back on Saturday as on their 62nd day on board the International Space Station and their 63rd day in space, Bob and Doug began to get the capsule ready for their ride home. Everything picked up when they got all of the final cargo into the Dragon capsule and then got themselves in and then closed that hatch, crawling in through the top hatch to the Dragon spacecraft, getting suited up shortly thereafter. Meanwhile, on the station side, Station Commander Chris Cassidy closed the A-Pass hatch, creating what is known as the vestibule, a space between the two hatches that would be exposed to vacuum following undocking. Then we use valves on the Dragon side to draw the air out of that vestibule in a depressurization step, bringing it down to vacuum and getting it ready for that eventual physical separation or undocking. After that was complete, the teams down here on the ground, both in MCCX right behind us in Hawthorne and in the International Space Station Flight Control Room in Houston, did a go-no-go for undocking, making sure everything was good with systems on board Dragon and the health of the International Space Station. Following that go-no-go, we had a successful separation with Dragon using Draco thrusters around its service section to physically separate from the International Space Station. After hooks had driven back that were holding it in place, it executed those 2 quick burns. Then it was on to 4 departure burns spread over a number of hours, initially taking Dragon up and over the International Space Station, which brought it behind, and then after it lowered its orbit beneath the station, eventually bringing it out in front. Following all of those successful departure burns, it was just about time for the crew to get some sleep. And actually, during their sleep period, we were able to do what's known as the departure phasing burn. It's a little off in this timeline as it actually switched in the final hours leading up, but that departure...
Dragon SpaceX, we have you loud and clear for suited comm check.
I read you the same.
Just pausing that timeline as the crew in their suit up steps, they just did a comm check. So they have communications run through the umbilical in their seats directly into their suits where they're able to maintain that conversation with the ground. We heard a little bit of chatters a few minutes ago as they were finishing up that fluid loading. Again, that's done to help with combating orthostatic intolerance. And to put it simply, that's dizziness in most people. Fluid loading can actually help your body react to what's typically a rush of blood away from the head once you get back down in a gravity environment, which can make you extremely dizzy. So fluid loading, you can actually up the amount of plasma in your blood, and that just helps kind of minimize that. They're also wearing what's known as an orthostatic garment, essentially compression pants that's squeezing their legs and forcing some of that fluid from the legs up towards the upper part of their body. So everything's continuing to proceed. They're suited up inside Dragon for the second time in the last 24 hours as we get ready for this deorbit.
Yeah, there on your screen, you can see a shot of our Mission Control Center here at SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California. Those folks there are our Dragon operators, our technical experts that continue to monitor the data and telemetry coming down from Dragon, not only about the vehicle, but of the crew themselves, continuing to make sure that everything is going well and just making sure that we are green or go to step into the next major milestones that we have coming up. At this point, we're about an hour and a half away from that. Those milestones will begin with the claw separation, which is when we initiate the jettison of the trunk. In order to expose the heat shield underneath the capsule, we need to let the trunk go away. So we separate the two. That trunk will actually re-enter the Earth's the trunk will actually re-enter the Earth's atmosphere, and it'll disintegrate upon doing so. Oh, we got our nice little animation back here, so I'll toss it back over to Dan.
Yeah, we did that departure phasing burn. That's what really kind of set us up on our pathway towards where we are today. And then the crew did have a sleep period. This was about a 19-hour phasing, or a 19-hour trip from the station to the splashdown. And then, as Kate was saying, we're almost up to claw and trunk separation.
Yeah, so at 10:51 a.m. Pacific, or 18:51 United time or Universal time, we will have that claw and trunk separation, which, like I said before, will basically allow us to expose the heat shield and prepare us to execute the deorbit burn. The deorbit burn is intended to place Dragon on its final trajectory to its landing zone, which, as we have mentioned before, it's determined to be off the coast of Pensacola, Florida. The deorbit burn will last about 11 and a half minutes. After doing so, we will close and lock the nose cone. We do this in order to protect the forward hatch located there at the top of the capsule. And we do that after the deorbit burn because the thrusters located there in the forward bulkhead are what we use to actually perform the deorbit burn. So once that nose cone is closed, we enter a 6-minute long communication blackout. This is because we are re-entering the atmosphere. As we encounter that atmosphere and friction builds up, plasma builds up on the external sides of the capsule, creating a barrier essentially where we can't command the capsule or receive telemetry. However, Dragon is completely autonomous, so totally fine. It's driving itself at that point anyway. So we will then, like I said, that blackout period lasts for 6 minutes. A couple minutes after that, we will deploy the drogue parachutes. Drogue parachutes are used for a couple of reasons. One, to help slow the vehicle down further before we deploy the main parachutes, as well as to stabilize the vehicle. About a minute after the drogue parachute deployment, we will deploy the 4 main parachutes. If you watched our Demo 1 splashdown, those are big, beautiful orange and white parachutes, and those further decelerate the vehicle down to a mere 15 or 16 miles per hour. That's the speed that they'll be going when they splash down in the Gulf of Mexico. Again, we're targeting just off the east coast of Florida near Pensacola. Once splashdown is confirmed and we cut the main parachutes away so they don't pull the capsule, recovery operations begin immediately. So that entails essentially getting the capsule out of the water and lifting it onto the recovery vessel. And once that is all secure, we open the hatch and we get our first glimpse of Bob and Doug back here on planet Earth for the first time since they launched on Falcon 9 back in late May. So that particular moment will be the first time they get to breathe fresh air, and we're looking forward to getting some thumbs up from them whenever we see them exit the capsule.
And everything's lining up for an on-time splashdown and recovery. We've been following the progress of Go Navigator as it makes its way out to the recovery zone. It left its port in Pensacola just a few hours ago, and we're tracking that it should be arriving on station just about at the top of this current hour. So it'll be there in advance of all of the upcoming hardware milestones where we get into trunk step and everything like that. So it'll be there and ready with the operational teams, a little over 40 personnel on board from SpaceX and NASA, ready to assist in the recovery of the capsule and getting Bob and Doug home.
Yeah. So as those mission controllers there in our mission control center here, just to my left, continue to monitor Dragon's health, we continue to monitor Twitter for your questions. We're using the hashtag AskNASA, and we're trying to get through to as many questions as possible this morning. Our next question comes to us from Jackie. The question is, what is the name of the Dragon recovery vessel that's sailing to the splashdown location? Great question, especially because we actually have 2. The one that we are utilizing today is Go Navigator. This recovery ship is for all of our all of the splashdown locations on the west coast of Florida. So any potential splashdown location in the Gulf of Mexico is serviced by Go Navigator. For our East Coast landing sites, which we will not be attempting today, we use Go Searcher. Both the Go Navigator and the Go Searcher are identical. They have a fully functional recovery platform as well as medical bays. So it's really nice that we're able to assist the departure process, so departing the International Space Station. It's really great that we're able to assist that departure process by allowing for more opportunities for departure by having more landing sites. So today we are using Go Navigator, and it departed for the landing zone about 2.5 hours ago, I think, at this point. And it is en route to the designated landing zone just off the coast of Pensacola.
All right, and our next question comes from Takur, who wanted to know, what's the importance of inventory check during the splashdown? If you were just listening a few minutes ago, you heard Bob and Doug going through a wide range of inventory checks, and a lot of it was their food and water, particularly the water, as they had just completed that fluid loading. As we've talked about a few times today, we have to meticulously track every single item on a spacecraft. For the obvious reasons, like if an astronaut needs to find it, it helps to know where it is. And then for some of the less obvious reasons, like we have to track where everything is, and if something is missing in a spacecraft, you have to kind of halt work once it's back on the ground and make sure you find it. And then also for things like food and water, that's something we call a consumable. So those are essentially resources that you have a finite amount of. Food, water, obviously one of those. They have about 3 days worth of food and plenty of water on board. It wasn't the limiting consumable for this flight home, as was discussed in our pre-return news conference. Carbon dioxide scrubbing was kind of the low man on the totem pole for the trip home. They have just about 3 days worth. So you have to think of all of these different items that are life support systems, typically that fall under that consumable port, whenever you're kind of mapping just how much on-orbit lifetime that you have. So we knew that we were going to either return today or within 47 hours after that. And so we make sure we have plenty for that situation, and then hours beyond that as just extra margin, as we're always about redundancy and backup plans and everything like that.
Something else to consider with respect to the importance of inventory, during the re-entry period, we don't want anything loose flying around. That is certainly hazardous to the crew. And so taking inventory of what has been unstowed and then restowed allows us to be absolutely sure that something didn't accidentally, because, you know, as you're floating there, it is easy to let go of something and then it might drift off to behind the control panel. Like Dan said before, it's very easy for things to kind of drift off on the International Space Station and get lost. So really having this inventory allows us to make sure that there aren't any foreign objects that aren't supposed to be out during the times in which they are meant to be stowed. So inventory is important for a number of reasons. Our next question comes to us from Tim. He says, my 10-year-old daughter, Haley, wants to know how hot the exterior of the spacecraft will get during re-entry. Awesome. Well, good morning, Haley, or afternoon or evening, depending on where you are. Thank you so much for tuning into our webcast. We're really pleased to have young viewers joining us for this historic mission. So a really good question. The outside of Dragon capsule will reach 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit. That is very hot, but Bob and Doug will be safe and comfortable inside of the Dragon capsule. We have measures in place to make sure that the inside of the capsule will be flushed with cold air, as well as the air inside of their spacesuits. So even though the outside will be getting really hot, Bob and Doug will barely be breaking a sweat.
All right, our next question comes from Mohan, who wants to know, will the Super Draco thrusters be a backup to the parachutes? That's a good question, because one of the earliest designs of Dragon had it doing what's called a propulsive landing. So kind of like how the Falcon 9 comes back, an early design of this Crew Dragon had it landing propulsively, so using those Super Dracos to touch down on like a runway. That's no longer in Dragon's configuration. In fact, those Super Draco thrusters are completely inhibited following a successful flight into orbit. They're only used for an emergency escape situation, either on the pad or during the initial climb up to orbit. They enable Dragon to do that escape from the pad all the way up, so you have kind of that extra safety net your entire way uphill. But once they're on orbit and they're making their way to the space station, or even when we're coming home, those thrusters are disabled. We're only using the smaller Draco thrusters around the service section, so the bottom of the capsule itself, and the 4 at the very top, the forward bulkhead thrusters. Our next question from Amy wants to know what happens to the parachutes after splashdown. Are they recovered?
Yeah, absolutely. So there will be, after splashdown, there will be 2 fast boats or smaller boats that will be approaching the Dragon capsule. The first boat is responsible for determining that there aren't any toxic vapors surrounding the capsule. That fast boat will then also be responsible for preparing the capsule for lift out of the water. The second boat is responsible for retrieving the parachutes out of the water. We definitely don't want to leave any waste behind where possible, and so that second boat is responsible for going and retrieving the parachutes. After splashdown, those parachutes are automatically cut so that there's no potential that if there was a little bit of wind, that the Dragon capsule wouldn't be moved due to wind catching in those parachutes. So great question, but short answer is yeah, they're cut. They're automatically cut after splashdown, and then one of the crews from the fast boats is responsible for going to pick them up. The next question we have coming from #AskNASA on Twitter comes to us from Novacon. What will be the purpose of the crew for the Crew 1 mission?
The Crew 1 mission will be what we call the first operational flight of the Dragon spacecraft. So the mission we're still on right now is a demonstration. This is still a test mission. This is when we're really proving out Dragon's capabilities from launch all the way through splashdown. After this test, if everything goes well and we're lined up great for a splashdown today, we'll sit down and we'll go through a certification process for SpaceX to fly operational missions. This means they'll be flying regular expedition long duration flights. So the Crew 1 will be the first 4-person crew to launch in a Dragon spacecraft and then spend 6 months on board the International Space Station. So we'll have 4 individuals, Mike Hopkins, Victor Glover, Shanna Walker, and Soichi Noguchi from the Japanese Aerospace Exploration Agency, launching in Dragon and then spending 6 months on board the space station doing science experiments, conducting spacewalks, repairs, everything that a normal expedition crew does. They'll just be arriving and leaving in a Dragon.
Yeah, I think Commander Chris Cassidy will still be on board with our targeted, given the current targeted Crew 1 launch.
SpaceX Dragon comm check from the PLT.
We've got you 5x5, Bob.
And I have 2 SpaceX and check between us.
And please repeat the last 5 seconds of that call. We had a bit of a comm dropout.
You out of clear as well. We have being Doug and I.
And Dragon, we copy that you heard us loud and clear. Unfortunately, the rest of the message was garbled. Please repeat one more time.
Yeah, we've got a good comm check between both of us, and we are complete with suit downing 4.010. How copy?
Okay, that was 5x5. We copy that you are complete with suit donning procedure.
Okay, it sounds like the crew now suited up. They just conducted those communications checks, those comm checks with the core here in Hawthorne. The core of the crew operations responsible engineer, that's essentially the person who's talking directly to Bob and Doug throughout their flight. That's rotated through a couple of different positions as we're on the 3rd shift of their flight home. And that'll be pretty much the person who's getting all of the updates to and from Bob and Doug, being that liaison between the teams on the ground. But they did those comm checks successfully. They are in their suits. They're going to stay in their suits and in their seats for the rest of the day, pretty much, from that deorbit burn.
SpaceX looking for an update on sections 1 through 4 of 4.700 deorbit preparation when able.
And SpaceX Dragon, we are complete with sections 1 through 4. And looking at section 5, the only thing left there to do is 5 alpha decimal 2. As far as the suit leak check, I think everything else is complete.
Okay, copy. Sections 1 through 4 are complete, and it sounds like we have. Sounds like you're completing fluid loading and standing by for the leak check.
That's a good copy, Mike.
Thanks, Doug. Appreciate it.
So what we heard there was communication between Dragon and...
And Mike, I just wanted to check back with you on the comm dropout that you had on the last 2 calls that I made to you. How is this comm now? Was it explainable as just random dropouts, or is it continuing from the PLTC?
Okay, Bob, we had you 5 by 5 just then, much better than before. We're investigating root cause, but given the clarity of your call just now, I would suspect your audio system is healthy.
Copy. Thank you.
Okay, so there we heard a little bit of communication, just confirming that we were that Mission Control was able to read or hear, as it's referred to, Bob and Doug clearly as they have put on their suits. We also heard the go for leak check. So now that the suits are on, we will be performing a quick leak check. We do this every time the suits are put on, or donned, as you heard it called. Basically, this is where we pressurize the suits. It's the only time that we pressurize them throughout the mission, and it's essentially to make sure that all the zippers are zipped up properly. All it takes is one small unzipped piece to not hold the pressure. So we make sure that everything is fitted up accordingly and that it's ready to go in case of a need to pressurize the suits later in the mission. Unlikely, but it's nice to know, just for that. For testing purposes, to know that that capability is there. That's what they're designed for. So that leak check will commence, and after we get that, we'll pressurize the suits themselves, and then they will depressurize. Bob and Doug will be able to lift the visor on their helmet again, and then that's essentially, that's what they will be wearing during this last phase of their mission as they re-enter the Earth's atmosphere. So a lot of good stuff there. Again, nope. No call there.
Fake out.
Like we said before, we're taking your questions through Twitter this morning using the hashtag AskNASA. Our next question comes to us from Robert. Is the U.S. Navy supporting recovery with ships and aircraft?
They are not. I suspect that question comes from the last time we did splashdowns with U.S. spacecraft and astronauts, where we had the Navy assisting throughout the Apollo program for the recoveries. They are not assisting in this. All of the recovery assets for the nominal mission are SpaceX. So SpaceX owns both recovery ships, the Go Navigator and the Go Searcher, and then contract out with the different helicopters and other assets that are used in this recovery. NASA does have a Department of Defense backup, essentially. If Bob and Doug were to have to splash down anywhere other than those 7 sites that we target around Florida, we have the capability to call them up to effect a fast rescue and recovery using parajumpers or whatever assets are available to us. They are also called up on launch days in the event that we were to have an abort on the way to orbit, with them coming down somewhere in the Atlantic. But for now, today, everything is SpaceX and NASA.
Another question coming to us from Humzi. Is there a time limit on how long the capsule can be left to float in the Atlantic Ocean before it needs to be recovered? Yeah, so obviously we want to get the crew out as soon as possible, let them get out and stretch their legs and begin their medical evaluations. However, the capsule would be able to float there for a couple of days, like we mentioned before. There is enough onboard water and food. They would be comfortable, although if the waves pick up I certainly would not be comfortable. That being said, we do strive to recover them as soon as possible. This is part of the reason why we have numerous potential landing zone sites, and we have special criteria for where they actually land to ensure that we're able to get the crew up and out of the water and into the medical bays essentially within an hour after splashdown.
All right, our next one comes from Mark, who wants to know, can they take over from the computer and do a manual splashdown if required? They can. Initiating a deorbit or an emergency deorbit is one of the capabilities available to crew members on board. You would have to be in a pretty extreme situation to do that. Something we're obviously not in today, as everything's gone really smoothly with Dragon, but that is something that's available to them. They also have the capability to manually step in for a number of the different steps during the re-entry, both mainly for any parachute deployments or even cutting the parachutes after they've splashed down. If that doesn't happen automatically, they have a button right in front of them on their displays where they can make that happen. So they do have quite a bit of capability to jump in if required.
Yeah, that is one of the few hardwired buttons on their display panel, but it is certainly not one that can be triggered accidentally. It is a two-step verification lever, essentially. So no need to worry about performing an emergency deorbit accidentally. Next question comes to us from NASA plus space equals heart. I couldn't agree more. Will this Crew Dragon be reused? Yes, it will. This particular capsule is intended to be reused on the Crew 2 mission, which will be launching sometime next year. And yeah, we already have plans for reuse for it. In fact, the team at the Cape is already preparing to begin those refurbishment processes as soon as the capsule lands, essentially, really getting a head start on that. The capsule is waterproof. That was a process that we learned how to do through the Crew Cargo program. Our reuse efforts with that program, with our previous version of the Dragon capsule, also known as Dragon 1, the process of making that waterproof that knowledge that we learned from that has transferred over to Crew Dragon capsules, and it's safe to say that it is with very little refurbishment required to the internal hardware. There's very little refurbishment required because we're able to keep it watertight and eliminate any exposure to salt water, which for metallic surfaces does cause corrosion, which is no good for spaceflight. So short answer is that, yeah, we will be reusing this as soon as next year on the NASA Crew 2 mission.
All right, our next one from Lisa. What are Bob and Doug bringing back from ISS, if anything? There's quite a bit, actually. They have about 150 kilograms, or a little over 330 pounds of cargo, essentially strapped to the ground right underneath their seats. The lion's share of that is utilization or science samples, a lot of it cold stowage samples that's kept in powered freezers. Those samples coming from a range of biological and biomedical studies, a lot of them with the astronauts themselves as the test subjects. As cargo return, a pretty critical capability as we execute a lot of the science on station, but we need to return a lot of the samples for analysis down in labs here on Earth, and they're going to be bringing a lot of that down. They're also returning some vehicle hardware items that have either malfunctioned or just passed their service life and need to come home or get inspected. And then a couple of their personal items, things like their sleeping bags are coming back with them. And they also have a couple of special items we've touched on a few times, including that tremor dinosaur that was chosen by both of their sons as their zero-G indicator for this mission, and the flag that was left there by Doug Hurley and his fellow crewmates of STS-135, the final space shuttle mission. That is coming home. It's been up there for just about 9 years, and it will fly again when we send humans around the moon in the not-too-distant future. And I know we haven't seen it, but I have heard that Little Earth is also coming back. I almost forgot about that. Little Earth was the zero-G indicator on Demo 1 and remained on station after that mission, and it's pretty sure it was packed away. to come home on demo too.
I think you're right. So right now, Dragon is currently flying over the far South Pacific Ocean. We have a nice little map here to show you of our ground tracking. So there you can see it on your screen. If you're curious, the yellow indicates where the capsule is in daylight. The red part of the line indicates where it goes into eclipse, or whenever it's basically hiding in Earth's shadow. So right now it's in daylight. Bob and Doug must be getting some pretty spectacular views as they're completing their suit up process. But at this point, we're going to take a quick break and leave you with our lovely ground map here.
Dragon SpaceX for video.
Go ahead.
Yeah, request to come back aboard when y'all are ready.
We are ready for you to come aboard.
Outstanding, and work.